Hey guys, tonight we wander deep into the wild woods of ancient Greece, where the trees seem older than time and the air hums with whispers. You're not sure when you left the beaten path, but now your feet move almost of their own accord, crunching softly through layers of fallen leaves. Every breath tastes of pine and distant rain. Shadows stretch long between the trunks, and somewhere far off you think you hear faint music. And that's when you spotted a crooked little wooden sign hanging from a moss-draped branch. The letters are faded, but still legible: Callisto's Inn and Tavern. Below it in smaller script where gods and mortals both find drink stories and trouble. You probably won't survive this. Well, not because of monsters or curses, though. Those are certainly options, but because this place has a reputation. An inn at the crossroads of worlds is a magnet for egos, grudges, and the occasional divine prank. Still, you're here now. And besides, it smells like roasted lamb inside. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door creaks open before you can knock. A squat, bearded figure in a wine-stained apron waves you in without so much as a glance. Inside the inn is warm and dimly lit smoke curling lazily toward the rafters. Oil lamps flicker along wooden beams. The scent of honeyed bread herbs and something slightly burnt fills the air. A lyre plays somewhere in the corner, its notes blending with low conversation. You find an empty seat at a long battered table. The bench wobbles. The patrons an odd mix. A mortal soldier dozes beside a tall, silver-eyed woman you suspect is more goddess than guest. In the corner, a satyr negotiates a bet with two laughing nymphs. Nearby, an old man hunched over a scroll mumbles about correcting the myths. Historians still argue whether his version of events is closer to the truth or just tavern bluster. The innkeeper, a man named Callistos, broad as a barrel, shuffles past with a tray of brimming goblets. He catches your eye, smirks, and says, "If it's stories you want, stay past the second jug of wine." That's when tongues loosen. You nod. The cup he hands you is cool and sweet with a sharp herbal edge. You sip, settle in. Not long after, a traveler takes the seat beside you. He's wiry weathered with an amused glint in his eye. "You're new," he says. "Let me tell you of the worst dinner guest this place ever saw. A beauty so cursed that even the gods rolled their eyes." You lean closer. "Ah, Narcissus. Yes, that Narcissus. But no, not the pawn story, not yet. First the banquet." And so the tale begins. You cradle your goblet as the traveler leans in voice, lowering though the murmur of the inn wraps you in a cocoon of sound. The room feels smaller now, closer, as if the very walls are leaning in to hear. His words flow like the wine, slow at first, then with a kind of irresistible pull. "You've heard the pawn story, of course," he begins, eyes twinkling. "But that's only how it ended. The real trouble had started right here at this very table." You glance at the scarred wooden surface beneath your fingertips. A faint circle, as if from a long-gone goblet, catches your eye. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps not. "Back then," the man continues, "Narcissus wasn't yet legend. Just a boy mortal, yes, but with a face the gods themselves might envy. Golden hair, eyes like storm-lit sea skin, so flawless it seemed carved from marble. And he knew it. Ah, one of those. They say it was a blessing," the traveler snorts softly. "But the wise among us know beauty like that. It's a curse, draws attention, jealousy, and sometimes worse." You sip your drink, the taste sharpens. Outside, wind stirs through the ancient trees. Now Narcissus wandered far and wide, admired by mortals, pursued by nymphs whispered about in Olympus itself. But he cared for none of them, not really. His heart was a mirror, it reflected only himself. You can't help but smile at the image. It's one thing to be vain, it's another to be legendary for it. And then came the nymph Echo. The traveler pauses, letting the name settle. She loved him, poor creature. Followed him through forest and glade, her voice stolen by Hera's curse. Only able to repeat the last words spoken to her. You can imagine how that went. You can, badly. Now word reached the woodland court that Narcissus would soon pass through these woods again. The nymphs here, a hopeful souls, conspired to host a feast. Not for love, he winks, but for sport. To see if beauty alone could charm a crowd, a dangerous game. You glance around the inn. A few older patrons nearby have subtly leaned in listening. Clearly this is a well-worn tale here. The invitation was extended, and against all wisdom, Narcissus accepted. Why, you ask, unable to help yourself? The traveler grins. To gaze upon his reflection in the polished silver platters, of course. Laughter ripples nearby. Even the old scroll mumbler lets out a dry chuckle. And so the stage was set, the finest foods prepared. The hall, this very room, decked with garlands. Musicians tuned their lyres. Goblets gleamed. And Narcissus, I'd arrived late naturally. The voice comes from across the table, an elderly nymph with moss in her hair, eyes sharp despite her years. And from the moment he stepped inside, we knew we'd made a mistake. How so, you ask, fully caught now? He saw only himself, she sighs, in every polished surface, every goblet, every glance he thought was adoration. It was, the traveler admits, but not for long. You settle back. The story is just beginning. The traveler leans back slightly, eyes half-lidded as if watching the scene unfold again, beneath the smoke-dark beams. Around you, the inn seems to quiet, the distant lyre softer now like a heartbeat beneath the tail. It was Callistos himself who greeted him, the man says, gesturing vaguely toward the bar, where the stout innkeeper polishes a goblet, eyes flicking over with a knowing smile. Ah yes, Callistos calls without looking up. I remember it well. The boy walked in as though the floor were spun from stars beneath his feet. Didn't even see me. Narcissus, the traveler continues, was not one for pleasantries. The nymphs had hoped for some wit, some charm perhaps, even a flicker of interest. But he brought none, the moss-haired nymph interrupts, voice wry. I'd arranged the garlands myself. He admired the shimmer of his own reflection in the wine jugs instead. Now, the traveler says, there was one among us who had known him longer than most. Old Philemon, the inn's previous keeper. A man who'd served both kings and tricksters, who claimed to have poured wine for Hermes himself. You glance toward a dusty old portrait on the far wall, faded now, but beneath the cracked varnish, the eyes of a sharp-faced elder peer out knowingly. Philemon watched Narcissus enter that night, the traveler says, and shook his head. That one, he muttered, will choke on his own beauty before the moon wanes. Of course the gods overheard. Which ones, you ask? The traveler spreads his hands. Historians still argue whether it was Nemesis who listened from the shadows, or Aphrodite herself massed among the revelers. Either way, the moss-haired nymph murmurs, doom was already seated at the table. And so the traveler continues, the feast began. You can almost see it now, the long tables gleaming beneath garlands, the air thick with rose and myrtle. Goblets filled and refilled, laughter, music, and at the center, Narcissus aglow in candlelight, a living sculpture, unreachable, untouchable. I was there, the old nymph says softly. I watched Echo hover near him, desperate for a glance, a word. He gave neither. Instead, her voice hardens. He used her cursed voice as sport. He'd speak a word, glorious perhaps, and hear it echoed back, glorious, then laugh as though mocking the very heart that adored him. A chill prickles your arms. Philemon saw it too, the traveler adds. He poured his wine slow that night, watching. And when the first dish arrived, when the silver platters gleamed beneath the lamps, Narcissus leaned not to the food, but to his own reflection. The nymph finishes bitterly. And thus began the worst dinner this inn has ever hosted, the traveler says, raising his goblet with a wry smile. You sip your own gaze, lingering on the worn table where perhaps once a perfect face gazed back, seeing nothing but itself. Now you must understand, the traveler continues, swirling the last inch of wine in his goblet. Beauty in this world is both a gift and a snare. The Greeks knew this well, and Narcissus, he was caught in it tighter than any mortal before him. You lean forward, the inn's dim light shimmering off the oil-stained wood between you. The air seems thicker now, scented with old pine smoke, and something more subtle, rosewater perhaps, or the ghost of garlands long wilted. It began with his birth, the traveler says, voice softening. Lyriope, his mother, a river nymph of surpassing grace, was warned even before the boy drew breath. She sought out Tiresias. The moss-haired nymph murmurs from her seat, her gaze distant. The great seer, blind yes, but no vision ever clearer. And Tiresias foretold this, the traveler says, the boy will live long so long as he never knows himself. Historians still argue whether knows himself meant self-awareness or something more literal, seeing his own reflection, the traveler adds with a crooked smile. But in either case, the trap was set from the first cry of life. You picture it, a child of surpassing beauty growing amidst whispers and wary glances. Praise poured on him like wine, but love slid from him like water from marble. He grew, the traveler says, and so did the tales. By the time he was 16, mortals and immortals alike spoke of his face with awe and sometimes dread. But no love could bind him. No affection touched that cool, perfect surface. The nymph sighs. He left hearts shattered behind him like so many broken amphorae. And still, the traveler says, he moved through the world untouched, until he taps the table lightly, he came to these woods. Why here, you ask? Perhaps the gods guided him, the nymph says softly. Or perhaps the woods reflected something he sought, beauty layered upon beauty streams, clear as glass flowers blooming in impossible hues. A mirror world for one who desired only to see himself. It was here, the traveler says, that the nymphs devised their plan. Tired of the trail of sorrow he left, they summoned a council beneath the moon. A feast, the nymph says, an invitation, and a final chance for humility or its undoing. Echo heard of it, the traveler adds quietly. And though her heart still ached, she came. For hope, for closure, no one can say. You can almost feel it now, the rustle of leaves beneath silken feet, the whispered plans, the tremble of Echo's hands as the invitation was delivered. And so, the traveler says, draining his goblet, the stage was set, a dinner for the damned. You glance again at the worn table, wondering whose gaze once danced upon its polished surface and whose heart broke in its shadow. And then the traveler murmurs, Echo arrived. The air in the inn feels different now, thicker, almost reverent. Even the lyre in the corner seems to hesitate between notes. She was not always a creature of shadows, the moss-haired nymph says softly, eyes shimmering with memory. Once her voice was her power, a melody that could charm the wildest heart or soothe the fiercest storm. Until Hera's wrath found her, the traveler adds. You know the tale, I'm sure. He leans closer. But if not, listen well. You do. The room seems to lean with you. Echo, you see, was no stranger to mischief, the traveler begins, eyes twinkling. She delighted in stories, in words spun like silk. And when Zeus, always wandering, always seeking, found interest in the woodland nymphs, Echo helped them evade Hera's jealous gaze. She stalled the queen with endless chatter, the nymph says with a faint, wistful smile. Her voice wove a web of words so dense Hera's fury simmered unnoticed beneath it. But gods, the traveler says, are not so easily fooled forever. When Hera uncovered the deception, her punishment was swift and cruel. She stole Echo's voice, the nymph says, bitterness flickering in her tone. Left her only able to repeat the words of others, never her own, a living reflection of sound doomed to echo the world, but never shape it. Imagine it, the traveler says softly, to love language, then lose it. To long for connection, but speak only borrowed words. A shiver brushes your spine. And so, the traveler continues, when word spread of the feast, Echo came not for sport, but for hope. A glimpse, a chance perhaps, a kind glance from the boy who haunted her heart. Poor child, the nymph murmurs. Hope is a crueler poison than any herb. Indeed, the traveler agrees. And so the night unfolded. The tables groaned beneath roasted boar honey figs, fresh cheeses and wine as dark as midnight. Yet Echo lingered at the edge of the gathering. He gestures lightly around the room, just there where shadow meets lamp glow. She watched, the nymph says, and when Narcissus entered late, of course, her smile turns brittle. Her heart leapt even as her fate was sealed. For he saw her not, the traveler says, not as nymph, nor as soul, nor as one who longed, only as a shadow that might dim his own light. Still, the nymph adds, she whispered his name. And what did he hear, you ask, already knowing? His own voice, the traveler replies, voice gentle now. Narcissus, she whispered, and from the shadows came Narcissus. He smiled, the nymph says bitterly, not in kindness, in vanity. For in that echo, the traveler says, he heard not longing nor love, but proof of his own perfection. Even the woods, it seemed, whispered his name. The inn falls silent for a heartbeat. And so, the traveler finishes softly. Echo's heart fractured. Yet still she remained drawn to the banquet where love and ruin would soon feast together. You draw a breath, the story's weight settling over your shoulders like a cloak. The worst dinner guest has not even begun to eat, and already hearts are breaking. Now here's where the folly truly began, the traveler says, voice smooth as the wine he pours anew. For while Echo suffered silently, the woodland court bustled with preparations. They would host Narcissus in grandeur, befitting a king or a trap. The invitation had been extended with ceremony. The moss-haired nymph explains, her tone dry. inscribed on the finest bark, sealed with river wax, delivered by a swallow with wings of silver. Historians still argue whether the nymphs sought to humble him, woo him, or simply amuse themselves. The traveler notes with a wry smile. Perhaps all three. And he accepted, you ask, brow lifted. Of course, the nymph scoffs. A banquet thrown in his honor with an audience guaranteed to admire him. How could he resist? So the nymphs planned, the traveler continues, leaning closer. They wove garlands of myrtle and rose, festoons of ivy draped from the beams. He gestures to the rafters overhead. Some say a few still linger. You glance upward. Perhaps a stray tendril remains twining through the ancient wood. Tables grown beneath bounty olives steeped in rare herbs bread, flecked with gold dust cheeses aged beneath moonlight. Amphorae of wine drawn from Dionysus's own reserves. The traveler winks, or so they claimed. Musicians were summoned, the nymph adds. Lyres strung with silver thread pipes carved from elderwood. Songs practiced until even the stones beneath the inn hummed with their melody. And amid this bustle, the traveler says, Echo watched, from shadows, from branches high above. Her heart caught between hope and despair. Did none warn her, you ask? Many tried, the nymph murmurs, but the heart hears only what it wishes, especially when cursed to speak no words of its own. And so, the traveler says, voice softening. The night of the feast arrived, lamps lit like stars, casting soft glow upon polished silver and polished faces alike. I remember it well, the nymph says, her gaze distant. We gathered beneath a sky thick with stars. The air shimmered with promise and a hint of dread. Guests arrived in cloaks of woven mist sandals kissed by dew. Minor gods, mortal poets, even a stray muse or two. And Narcissus, you ask, though you already sense the answer. Late, the traveler says, chuckling darkly. Fashionably so. For what is time to one who deems himself timeless? Echo waited still, the nymph whispers. Each moment a blade within her breast, each heartbeat an echo of hope unspoken. And when at last he came, the traveler says, eyes narrowing, the feast, he taps the table once, shifted. From celebration to spectacle, from hope to ruin. The inn seems to exhale around you, shadows deepening. You lean forward, drawn inexorably toward the next turn of the tale. You can almost hear the hush that must have fallen over the banquet. As the great doors creaked open, the traveler's voice dips into a reverent, almost mocking tone. He entered as if stepping onto a stage, he says. Clad in a tunic finer than any mortal should possess threads of midnight and starlight, or so it seemed. And yet, no one looked at the garment, the moss-haired nymph murmurs. Their eyes, our eyes, went straight to him, to that face, that flawlessness. It caught the breath in your throat like drowning in beauty. A dangerous thing, the traveler adds, swirling his wine. For such beauty awakens not love but envy, and sometimes hate. And Echo, you ask, already picturing her in the shadows? She froze, the nymph whispers, her longing tangled with dread. Hope flickered, foolish, fragile. The hall was silent as he crossed it. The traveler continues. A hush deeper than reverence. Goblets stilled. Even the musicians faltered mid-note. He moved without haste, the nymph says, as though the world itself would wait for him. And then, the traveler leans in. He reached the head of the table, this very one, and seated himself without a word. You glance at the scarred wood before you again imagining that perfect figure reclining where now only worn grooves remain. Callisto's brave soul that he was stepped forward to welcome him. With wine, the nymph smiles faintly, the finest. Yet when the goblet was raised, her voice sharpens. Narcissus gazed not upon the host nor the gathered court, but upon the shimmering surface within. He tilted the goblet this way and that, the traveler says, miming the motion, admiring the play of his reflection, oblivious to all. An echo whispered. Then, the nymph says softly, Narcissus, and again came the echo. Narcissus. He smiled, the traveler says grimly. A smile so cold, so self-satisfied, it chilled the wine in the goblets. We knew then, the nymph adds, the feast was lost. Yet, still it began, the traveler says. Courses brought forth with ceremony, roasted quail, honey dates, cheeses shaped like the crescent moon. But his gaze never lifted from polished surfaces. He barely touched the food, the nymph says, for why would one who fed upon his own reflection hunger for mortal fare? The court watched a mix of fascination and disgust, the traveler says. Some amused, some angry, all trapped in the orbit of this beautiful void. And through it all, the nymph murmurs. Echo remained, hidden, hoping. Foolish hope, the traveler sighs, for each echo of his name deepened the chasm between them. You lean back, the story settling like mist around you, a banquet meant for revelry, now a theater of vanity, a heart poised to break, and the worst dinner guest the woods would ever know had not yet begun his greatest offense. Now imagine, the traveler says, voice smoothing into a storyteller's cadence, that you too were seated at that long table. He gestures around the inn's battered expanse, among gods, nymphs, satyrs, and the occasional mortal bold enough to accept such an invitation. And in your mind, you do. The hall is aglow with oil lamps suspended from twisted bronze. Their light pools on silk banners strung between carved pillars, each embroidered with mythic scenes, Heracles wrestling the Nemean lion Orpheus, luring stone to tears, Artemis loosing silver arrows into the stars. The banquet table stretches like a river of bounty platters of pomegranate glistening lamb honey-drizzled figs. Goblets of chased gold and clay alike brim with deep red wine. And you, by some twist of fate, or perhaps the caprice of a minor deity, find yourself seated midway down, flanked by figures both storied and strange. To your left, a mortal poet nervously scribbles lines on a wax tablet, eyes flicking often toward a muse 3 seats down. To your right, a dryad plucks idly at a lyre strung with silver hair, her smile distant eyes shadowed. The hall buzzed with expectation, the traveler continues. Not for the food, but for the spectacle to come. And Narcissus, you ask, though you already see him in your mind's eye. There, the traveler says, gesturing toward the head of the imagined table, reclining as though sculpted for the occasion. One hand languid on the goblet, the other trailing fingers along the mirrored platter before him. He spoke little, the moss-haired nymph adds, but when he did, his voice dripped honey and venom both. Her gaze hardens, sweet to hear, bitter in meaning. Echo lingered nearby, the traveler says, half hidden behind a pillar veiled in ivy. Every glance he spared the room sent her heart racing. He pauses, voice softening, until she realized none were truly for her. You glance again at the imagined scene, the music low, conversations muted. All eyes drawn again and again to the figure who seemed to outshine even the feast's splendor. But not all were enthralled, the traveler notes with a crooked smile. There were those seated among us who saw the danger in such beauty unchecked. A minor river god, the nymph murmurs, a satyr known for his sharp tongue, a goddess of modest fame but keen wit. They exchange glances. She smiles faintly, and wagers. On what, you ask? On whether the boy would eat it all before the night was through, the traveler chuckles, or whether he would drown in the sea of his own reflection. Laughter ripples faintly from nearby tables, whether from the memory or the tale now retold. And so the courses came and went, the traveler says, each more elaborate than the last. Yet Narcissus remained unmoved, ensnared by the shifting image within his goblet. And still, the nymph whispers. Echo watched, hope fluttering fragile as moth-winged light. Poor soul, the traveler sighs, to sit amidst such plenty with a hunger no feast could sate, and you seated among them now, and your mind can feel the weight of that moment, food untouched, eyes fixed on a reflection, hearts straining toward a love that would never see them. A banquet meant to bind now trembles on the edge of ruin. And then, the traveler says, voice dropping into a conspiratorial hush. He made his entrance complete. You blink surprised. I thought he was already there. Ah, the traveler smiles knowingly. His body was present. But the moment I speak of the moment, the feast truly belonged to him, came when the mirror arrived. Ah, the mirror, the moss-haired nymph sighs, shaking her head. Such foolishness, such mischief. It began with a minor god, a Glyphantes, the traveler explains. A trickster of no great consequence, yet with a flair for turning small moments into grand disasters. Historians still argue whether he acted out of boredom, jealousy, or sheer love of chaos, the nymph adds wryly. Whatever the reason, the traveler continues, as the third course was cleared and a lull settled over the table, a Glyphantes rose. In his hands a gift, a mirror of polished bronze, its surface so finely wrought that it seemed more water than metal. You can almost picture it, the mirror catching the lamplight, casting flickering reflections across the banquet hall like captive stars. He approached Narcissus with a bow so deep it mocked the very idea of reverence, the traveler says. For you, he proclaimed, that the world might admire you as keenly as you admire yourself. A cruel jest, the nymph says. Yet one Narcissus embraced as a lover might a long-lost paramour. He seized the mirror, the traveler says, voice rich with irony. And from that moment, the feast no longer mattered. Nor the guests, the nymph adds, nor the music, nor the wine, only the image within. You lean forward, imagining the scene, Narcissus holding the mirror, close eyes wide, with rapture lips parted in silent praise of his own reflection. He turned it this way and that, the traveler says, miming the motion, admiring every angle, smiling, pouting, gazing with an intensity no mortal or god could withstand. Echo whispered then, the nymph says softly, beautiful. And back came the cursed reply, beautiful. Her heart shattered anew, the traveler says, and we watched a boy become a prisoner of himself. Some laughed, the nymph says bitterly. Others pitied. A few grew angry. But none could stop it, the traveler finishes. For Narcissus was beyond reach, now lost in a love no banquet could rival. The room around you seems to fade, replaced by that ancient hall, the flicker of lamplight upon bronze, the soft echo of a voice doomed to mirror desire unreturned. And so, the traveler says, voice low, the worst dinner guest in all the woodlands held court not with wit or charm, but with a gaze turned inward and a heart chained to its own image. You exhale slowly, feeling the weight of the tale pressing gently against your ribs. The feast, it seems, has only begun to unravel. The first courses came and went, the traveler continues, voice thick with remembered frustration. But Narcissus barely noticed. The finest olives drizzled in golden oil, lamb slow roasted with figs and honey, fresh bread still steaming from the oven, all ignored. His eyes, the moss-haired nymph says bitterly, saw only the mirror. His lips moved, but not to taste, only to whisper his own name. Narcissus, the traveler intones softly, and you can almost hear it echo off the imagined stone walls. Narcissus. The musicians played on, he says, soft and hesitant now, as though their notes might break whatever spell had ensnared the boy. Conversation dwindled. Even the wine seemed to sour in the mouth. Echo hovered near the pillars, the nymph says, voice low, her gaze a storm of longing and despair. Yet every word she might have spoken was stolen by her curse. Only his own words could reach him, and only through her borrowed voice. And he reveled in it, the traveler adds grimly, believing the very world sang in adoration. You can see it now, the banquet turning cold, a room full of immortals and mortals alike, watching some with scorn, others with pity, all helpless to shift the boy's gaze. But then came the turning point, the traveler says, leaning in. A goblet tall, silver-rimmed, filled with the deepest red wine, placed before him by a nymph whose patience had worn thin. And what did he do, you ask, already suspecting the answer? He lifted it, the traveler says, miming the motion, not to drink, but to angle it, to better see himself. A mirror in a mirror, the nymph murmurs, a fool's infinity. And then, the traveler says, voice rich with irony, he tipped it too far. You lean closer. Wine spilled across the table, he says, a crimson river snaking between platters and goblets. The mirror caught the splash, distorting, darkening his reflection. He gasped, the nymph says, a touch of satisfaction in her tone, as though struck. Panicked, he reached to blot the mirror with his sleeve. The traveler continues, eyes wide with horror at the marred image. And in that moment, the room breathed again. A few laughed outright, the nymph says. Others exchanged knowing glances. A minor victory, fleeting though it was. But for Narcissus, the traveler says softly, it was a wound deeper than any blade. His perfect reflection, spoiled however briefly, had shaken him to the core. And Echo, you ask? She whispered again. The nymph says, lost. And from the shadows came the mournful echo, lost. Yet still he remained, the traveler says, refusing food, refusing company, clinging to that bronze prison, as though life itself depended on it. The feast, the nymph says, began to sour in truth. Dishes grew cold, wine turned bitter. The music faltered into silence. And the guests, you ask? Some left, the traveler shrugs. Others lingered out of morbid curiosity. But all knew this was no celebration now. It was a caution-ridden flesh and folly. You sip your imagined wine, tasting the bitterness of a feast undone. And so, the traveler finishes quietly, the worst dinner guest sat enthroned in his own ruin, while love and life slipped ever further from his grasp. A silence settles between you, as though even the inn itself remembers that ancient aching moment. Now where were we? the traveler says, swirling his goblet thoughtfully. Ah yes, the moment when even the gods began to tire of him. You shift on the bench, drawn ever deeper into the haze of the tale. Around you, the imagined banquet still flickers in your mind. Silver platters, cooling wine stains spreading like bruises. And at the heart of it all, Narcissus entranced unreachable. At first, the traveler continues, the divine guests had watched with idle amusement. Beauty often draws envy, but it also tempts mischief, a flaw to poke a thread to pull. Yet as the hours passed, the moss-haired nymph says, voice-dry amusement soured, conversations grew strained. Even the immortals who have eternity to spend found their patience tested. They began to grumble, the traveler says, soft at first like distant thunder, then louder. A minor river god, Achelous, swollen with wine and pride, spoke first. Does the boy feast on air alone? The nymph mimics in a booming voice. Or does he require ambrosia brewed from his own reflection? A ripple of uneasy laughter had passed through the hall. You imagine a brittle sound that cracked the charged silence. Others followed, the traveler says. Amused remarked that even Narcissus' reflection must be tiring of him. A satyr wagered a skin of wine that the boy would starve before speaking to another soul that night. And all the while, the nymph says softly, echo lingered, hope a fading ember. Each word of mockery burned her as surely as it stung him. But he heard none of it, the traveler says, or chose not to. For in the polished bronze, in the shimmer of spilled wine, he saw only perfection, and perfection returned his gaze. Then came the moment, the nymph says, eyes narrowing, when even the most indulgent goddess Aphrodite herself perhaps sighed in exasperation. She leaned toward the trickster Aglaophantes, the traveler says with a smirk, and murmured, your jest has soured the wine in the night. Will you not unmake it? But the god only smiled, the nymph says, for chaos once set loose is not so easily called back. And so the tension mounted, the traveler continues. Goblets clinked harder. Conversations turned sharp. The feast hung poised on the edge of open mockery. Yet, through it all, the nymph murmurs, Narcissus remained untouched, untouchable, lost within a prison of his own making. It was then, the traveler says, that Echo made one final trembling attempt. You hold your breath, she whispered, beloved, and from the shadows came the plaintive echo, beloved. But no flicker of recognition stirred him, the nymph says, only a faint smile as though the very word confirmed his own worth. And so, the traveler finishes softly, the grumbling gods began to plot more pointed diversions. The banquet teetered on the edge of farce and fate. You exhale slowly, the weight of the tale pressing against your chest. Remember this, the traveler adds, voice low, even among gods and legends, vanity is the swiftest path to ruin. And as the imagined feast flickers before you, you cannot help but wonder how much further could the night unravel. Now it would be a mercy to say the banquet ended there. The traveler continues, voice soft with irony. But mercy was in short supply that night. You lean in, almost forgetting the cool weight of your goblet in hand. The scene unfolds sharper now, faces drawn taut with impatience, silver dulled beneath a gathering storm of glances. Echo still hovered near the pillars. The moss-haired nymph says, her voice barely more than breath. Her eyes never leaving him, her heart. She presses a hand briefly to her chest, already breaking. She watched as the gods began to murmur more boldly, the traveler says. Yet none dared act, for though they wear many masks, the immortals understand this truth. Beauty can be as dangerous as any blade. And Echo, you ask, though the answer hums in your bones. Desperate, the nymph whispers. She stepped from the shadows. Her eyes glisten for the first time that night. A single step, the traveler says. One trembling footfall upon the stone floor. The sound rang louder than any trumpet in that hush. Narcissus turned, the nymph says. For the first time that night, he looked beyond the mirror. And what did he see, you ask? A reflection, the traveler sighs. Not of self, but of longing, raw and unguarded. A nymph stripped of voice of pride, standing before him with a love too vast for words. She opened her mouth, the nymph says, eyes bright with old grief. But only his last word tumbled forth, beloved. And he laughed, the traveler says bitterly. Not cruelly, perhaps merely carelessly. As though even this confession were but another tribute to his perfection. He lifted the mirror once more, the nymph continues, and spoke aloud as if to her, Who could love but me, who could deserve such beauty? An echo, the traveler says, voice roughening, whispered in reply, me. A silence falls over your imagined banquet hall, a silence deeper than scorn, colder than pity. She fled then, the nymph whispers, fled into shadow, her heart in tatters, her voice such as it remained fading into the stones. Some say, the traveler murmurs, that her footsteps still echo through these woods. Others know, the nymph says grimly, for we hear her still. Even now, in the dim corner of the inn, a faint shiver traces your spine as though some distant, hopeless whisper yet lingers in the rafters. And Narcissus, you ask softly. Unmoved, the traveler replies. He turned back to his mirror, untouched by the wreckage he'd wrought. The worst dinner guest, not merely in conduct, but in heart. For what is a feast, the nymph murmurs, when love is made a mockery and kindness left to starve? You can almost see her there still echo, vanishing into darkness, her last fragile hope scattered like petals beneath indifferent feet. And across the table, the traveler meets your gaze. But the night, he says softly, was far from done. Now you might think the gods would tolerate such behavior out of sheer amusement, the traveler says, leaning back with a dry smile. But even the divine have their limits. You picture the scene again, the once glorious banquet, now a stagnant pool of resentment and uneaten delicacies. The air thick with unspoken curses, the music long since faded. By that point, the traveler continues, the gods at the table had grown restless. Whispers turned to open mutters. A satyr, bold from too much wine, began to tap his goblet pointedly loud enough for all to hear. Others followed, the moss-haired nymph says with a sharp nod. A minor muse rolled her eyes so dramatically that even stone might have blushed. The river god Achelous thumped his great fist on the table, causing goblets to jump. Yet still Narcissus remained as if carved from ivory, the traveler says. Head bent to the mirror lips, moving in whispered adoration. And then came the breaking point, the nymph says, her voice darkening. A single word, a single reckless dare spoken aloud. Someone should shatter that cursed thing. The traveler quotes voice, low but firm, before he forgets to breathe entirely. It was a jest, the nymph murmurs, but one the gods heard. And the grumbling began in earnest, the traveler says. First the lesser immortals, then the greater. One by one, the patience that had held the feast together frayed to threads. Historians still argue whether it was Nemesis who first rose her gaze cool as river ice, or whether it was Dionysus himself who muttered, even I grow weary of this play. Regardless, the nymph says, judgment stirred. A murmur swept the table. The traveler leans in voice almost conspiratorial, and with it a subtle shift of power. No longer was Narcissus the unchallenged center of the gathering. Now he stood on the edge of divine ire. Yet he noticed nothing, the nymph says bitterly. For what is wrath to one enthralled by his own image? And so the tension rose, the traveler says. Wine spilled deliberately now, goblets slammed down, jest sharper, voices louder. And through it all, the nymph adds, Echo's absence was a hollow in the hall. Her departure had left a silence more painful than any shout. Some guests began to rise, the traveler says, tiring of the charade. Others remained drawn by the morbid spectacle, a beauty undone by its own gravity. And at the heart of it all, the nymph whispers, the worst guest sat blind to ruin, deaf to scorn a mirror, his only companion. It was no longer a feast, the traveler says. It was a lesson unfolding one the gods had no intention of allowing him to escape. For beauty without humility, the nymph says softly, is a flame that consumes all in its light, including itself. You sit in silence a moment, feeling the charged air of that long-ago hall settling like dust upon your skin. And soon, the traveler adds, that flame would begin to flicker. So there he sat, the traveler says, voice slow as honey now. Head bent low, eyes locked upon his bronze reflection, utterly unaware that the air had shifted from reverence to resentment. You can feel it in the imagined banquet hall, the simmer beneath every gaze, the collective inhale before some inevitable release. The spilled wine still glistened across the table, the moss-haired nymph murmurs. And the mirror, though polished and fine, now bore streaks and droplets that marred its perfect surface. But Narcissus saw none of it, the traveler says. Or perhaps he did, and simply refused to accept imperfection in the object of his devotion. The gods watched, the nymph adds, and the mortals watched the gods, each waiting to see who would move first. It was the satyr, the traveler says with a grin, bold wine loosed and weary of the boy's vanity. His name was Selenion, a creature of rough charm and a sharper tongue. He rose unsteadily, the nymph says, smiling faintly at the memory. Goblet in hand, voice slurred but strong. "Oh, mighty Narcissus," the traveler quotes, voice lilting with mockery. "Would you like us to serve your reflection on a platter? Perhaps then you deign to taste the feast prepared in your honor." You stifle a laugh, picturing the scene, half the table frozen in shock, the other half stifling dangerous smirks. Narcissus looked up then, the traveler says, eyes gleaming. For the first time in what seemed an age, he tore his gaze from the mirror to regard the satyr. "And what did he say, you ask?" "He smiled," the traveler says darkly. A slow, languid curl of the lips, and then he pauses, savoring the moment. He raised his goblet and spoke. "Why should I taste food?" the nymph recites softly, "when I have already tasted perfection." A groan rises from your imagined banquet crowd. Even you wince at the sheer arrogance of it. And with that, the traveler says, he tipped the goblet once more, not to drink, but to admire anew his own eyes reflected in the wine-dark depths. The hall erupted then, the nymph says. Laughter, scorn, outright jeers from those emboldened by the satyr's daring. Yet still, the traveler murmurs, Narcissus remained unmoved. For what are the voices of others to one so enthralled by his own echo? Even the gods shifted in their seats, the nymph says, voice sharp. A flick of a fan here, a tightening of a grip there. Divine displeasure mounting like a storm on the horizon. An echo, you ask softly. Gone, the traveler says, his tone gentler now. Fled into the darkened forest, her voice a broken thread in the tapestry of that night. And still the boy preened, the nymph says bitterly, as though the feast, the company, the world itself existed for no purpose but to frame his perfection. But perfection, the traveler says leaning forward, is a fragile thing, and the gods were about to remind him just how swiftly it can shatter. A shiver coils along your spine, the imagined scene tightening like a noose. So drink deep, friend, the traveler says softly, for the feast is not yet done, and ruin when it comes can be a most satisfying course. And so the satyr's words rang through the hall, the traveler continues, voice rich with memory. And though Narcissus seemed to dismiss them with a languid smile, the room had shifted. A line had been crossed. You can feel it now, the tension in that imagined air, taut as a lyre string drawn too far. The gods no longer amused the mortals emboldened, and at the center of it all, a boy too blind to see his own undoing. Selenion did not sit, the moss-haired nymph says. He stood there swaying, slightly daring a response. For in the eyes of the satyrs, mockery is an art, and few moments more ripe than this. And Narcissus, the traveler says with a wry grin, answered with words as honeyed as they were hollow. You call me vain, he intoned, lifting the mirror once more. But what is vanity but the acknowledgement of truth should I pretend ugliness, where beauty reigns supreme? A toast of pure arrogance, the nymph spits, and one that curdled the wine on every tongue. To perfection, the traveler says, raising his goblet in ironic mimicry, may it never fade and may I ever be its vessel. And then he drank, the nymph says, but not the wine. No, her eyes narrow, he drank the sight of himself reflected within it. The hall broke then, the traveler says. Laughter jeers, whispered curses. Even the stone pillars seemed to tremble with the weight of disdain. In Echo's absence, the nymph adds, was a wound that deepened with every heartbeat. Her love scorned her voice, abandoned to shadow. Now the gods stirred in earnest, the traveler says, leaning closer. A ripple of silk as robes shifted, the faint crackle of unseen power gathering like storm clouds in the high air. Historians still argue whether it was Nemesis who first spoke or if Aphrodite herself flicked a single unseen finger toward fate, the nymph notes. But what is agreed upon is this judgment had been called. Yet mortals too can spark change, the traveler says. And it was the satyr, our bold Selenion, who rose once more. He seized a goblet, the nymph says, voice taut, brimming with dark wine. And with a grin both wicked and weary, he strode forward. If perfection is all you crave, the traveler quotes, eyes gleaming, then let us toast it properly. And before god or mortal could stop him, he flung the wine. The traveler makes a sweeping gesture across the mirror. A crimson veil, the nymph breathes, staining bronze, obscuring beauty, drowning reflection in bitter red. And Narcissus, the traveler says softly, screamed. A sound to chill the marrow, the nymph whispers. A child's cry at the shattering of a dream. A god's fury made mortal. He clutched the mirror, scrubbing with frantic hands. the traveler says. But the stain would not yield, and the hall watched in silence as vanity dissolved into despair. And that, the nymph says, her voice dark with old satisfaction, was the beginning of the end. You sit frozen, the image burning bright behind your eyes, a boy undone by a splash of wine, a feast transformed into a trial, and the echo of a love now forever lost. But ruin, the traveler murmurs, was not yet complete. The gods had not yet spoken. And you find yourself holding your breath, waiting for that divine judgment to fall. Ah, but did you think he would retreat gracefully? The traveler says, voice tinged with dark amusement. No, friend. Vanity, once wounded, lashes out like a cornered beast. You can almost see it. Narcissus hunched over the now sullied mirror, pale fingers scrubbing furiously at the bronze, smearing wine into bruised shadows. The hall had fallen to silence, the moss-haired nymph murmurs. No lyre, no pipe. Even the satyrs held their breath, watching the boy's frantic, futile efforts. And then he stood, the traveler says, slowly, unsteadily, a prince of ruin in wine-stained silk. His eyes, the nymph says, shivering slightly, were wild. No longer the serene pools that had beguiled nymphs and mortals alike. Now they burned with fury and shame. He raised the mirror high, the traveler says, miming the motion with an invisible weight, as though to command it to reflect only perfection once more. And then he spoke, the nymph says bitterly, a toast not to beauty, but to spite. You lean forward, feeling the crackle in the air, the moment drawn taut as a bowstring. You mock me, the traveler quotes in a cold, imperious voice. You envy what you cannot possess, but know this, none among you shall match me now or ever. A child's defiance, the nymph says, draped in words meant to wound. And yet, the traveler continues, his gaze flickered not to the gods nor the satyrs, but to the empty space where Echo had once stood. Too late, the nymph whispers. Too late for regret, too late for love. And so he laughed, the traveler says, a brittle sound sharp as shattering glass. I am perfection, the nymph recites softly. I need no reflection to know my worth. And with that, the traveler says, voice grim, he hurled the mirror to the floor. A single ringing crash, the nymph says. Bronze bent cracked a web of ruin spreading through its polished face. And there he stood, the traveler says, breath-heaving eyes blazing, unaware that the judgment he had invited now stood poised to fall. For the gods, the nymph says, voice low and dangerous, do not take kindly to arrogance so bold, nor to love so callously discarded. Nemesis moved first, the traveler says, her gaze colder than the void between stars. No word passed her lips, but the air itself seemed to darken. And in that silence, the nymph adds, the truth of Narcissus's curse was sealed. Historians still argue, the traveler notes, whether it was spoken aloud or merely willed into being. But the meaning was clear. May he love only what cannot love him in return. And so it began, the nymph whispers, a fate darker than death. For to hunger without hope, to love without return, that is a torment few can endure. The guests watched, the traveler says, some in pity, others in grim satisfaction. The satyr who had cast the wine raised his goblet once more, not in mockery now, but in somber understanding. And Narcissus, you ask, heart tightening. He stood alone, the traveler says softly, amid spilled wine and shattered pride, blind to all but the ghost of a reflection he could no longer find. The worst dinner guest, the nymph says bitterly, and now the most cursed. You sit in stillness, the image burning behind your eyes. A boy undone not by enemies, but by himself and by the heart he had broken beyond repair. And the feast, the traveler adds, voice a whisper now, had not yet fully ended. The feast unraveled after that, the traveler says, voice as low as the dying embers of a fir. A celebration turned to a caution, a hall once filled with song now hushed beneath the weight of judgment. You can see its silver platters pushed aside, goblets abandoned mid-toast, eyes darting some in pity, others in grim triumph. And at the center of it all, Narcissus, a fallen star amid the wreckage of his own making. The gods began to leave first, the moss-haired nymph murmurs. No grand exits, no parting words, just a slow ripple of movement, silk whispering against stone. Even the satyrs lost their appetite for jest, the traveler says. Selenian bowed mockingly once more, then stumbled away, wineskin half drained. And the nymphs, the nymph says, eyes shadowed, watched Narcissus, as though seeing the future unfold in the curve of his hunched shoulders. For he remained, the traveler says, frozen, staring at the broken mirror. A child of surpassing beauty trapped in a prison of his own desire. Historians still argue whether it was madness or magic that rooted him there, the nymph notes. But rooted he was. And the food, you ask, voice soft? Untouched, the traveler says. The lamb grown cold, the figs shriveled in their honeyed glaze. Even the wine tasted of ash and regret. The hall emptied slowly, the nymph continues. Mortals first eager to escape the suffocating air. Then the immortals, their judgment complete. And yet, the traveler says, one remained. You lean forward. Callistos, the nymph says, a faint smile touching her lips. The innkeeper, this very place. He approached the boy, the traveler says. A man who had served kings and fools alike, whose patience had outlived many a god's favor. He knelt, the nymph says, placed a hand gentle fatherly on the boy's trembling shoulder. Eat, the traveler quotes softly. Drink, the world is wider than any reflection. But Narcissus did not hear, the nymph whispers, or would not. His gaze remained fixed on the twisted ruin of the mirror, as though willing it to mend itself. And so, the traveler says, voice heavy now, Callistos left him, a single lamp left burning, the doors drawn shut with sorrow. And in the silence that followed, the nymph says, the boy wept. No for love lost, nor for the feast undone, but for the face he could no longer see unmarred. A tearful monarch of an empty court, the traveler says, a banquet hall transformed into a tomb of pride. And beyond the walls, the nymph whispers. Echo's voice faded into the forest. No longer calling, no longer hoping. Only a thread of sound lost to time. You sit with that image now, lamplight flickering over a boy, undone the hollow echo of a feast that would be remembered not for joy, but for folly. And so the night ended, the traveler says softly. But Narcissus's tale had only begun to wither. Of course, the traveler says, voice like a thread drawn through the dark. No tale ends so neatly, especially when the gods are involved and when pride is left to fester. You picture the hall now, abandoned silver dulled beneath cooling ash, a single lamp guttering beside a solitary figure. The feast undone, the revelers departed. But Narcissus remained. He sat through the night, the moss-haired nymph murmurs, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling. The mirror lay broken before him, yet still he stared into fragments that no longer obeyed his will. A king of ruin, the traveler says softly, and as dawn approached, the true shape of his curse began to unfold. For the gods, the nymph continues, do not merely punish, they teach, and vanity left unchallenged breeds not wisdom, but emptiness. And so when the first rays of Helios touched the hall, the traveler says Narcissus rose. Slowly, each movement, brittle as frost, he stumbled into the forest, the nymph says, drawn by a pull he did not understand. Her voice lowers, or perhaps by the faintest fading echo of a voice once full of love. Historians still argue whether it was divine compulsion or simple madness that led him there, the traveler notes, but lead him it did, to the hidden spring, the nymph whispers. A place where the waters run so clear, so still, they reflect not the world above, but the heart beneath. A cursed place, the traveler says, blessed by the muses, haunted by the wrath of Nemesis, a mirror to the soul. And there, the nymph says, he knelt. You can see it, the boy pale and hollow-eyed, leaning over waters so perfect they seem forged of starlight. A broken prince gazing into a truth too sharp to bear. He saw not the sky nor the trees, the traveler murmurs. Only the reflection he had worshipped, and the ruin now etched upon it. Yet still he reached, the nymph says, fingers trembling, yearning to caress an image that fled at the slightest ripple. And so the cycle began, the traveler says, voice weary now. Reach and retreat, hunger and despair, a love doomed by its very nature. Echo watched from afar, the nymph whispers, her heart a hollow shell. No words left. Only the faintest broken syllables carried by the breeze. Beloved, the traveler intones softly. Beloved, the nymph echoes. And the gods watched, the traveler says, their judgment complete, their lesson delivered. But perhaps even among them a flicker of pity stirred. Yet none intervene, the nymph says, for what is divine mercy to a mortal trapped by his own making? And there he remained, the traveler says, day fading to night, hunger forgotten, thirst unheeded, consumed by a love that would never return his gaze. And in the depths of the forest, the nymph whispers, The sound of the shattered feast still lingered. Her voice thins, a warning to those who would mistake beauty for worth and reflection for truth. You shiver the imagined spring gleaming cold beneath your mind's eye. And even now, the traveler adds softly, the tale has one last turn yet to take. The days passed, the traveler says, voice low and steady, though to Narcissus, time had no meaning anymore. You see him there alone by the spring, the forest around him, shifting from dawn to dusk and back again unnoticed. The once vibrant boy, now a gaunt, pale figure, eyes locked upon that shimmering reflection. He no longer slept, the moss-haired nymph murmurs, nor ate, nor drank save for the occasional mouthful of the very water that mocked him. Historians still argue whether he wasted from hunger or from the sheer force of obsession, the traveler says. But all agree the end drew near. And through it all, the nymph whisper's echo lingered, a ghost among shadows, watching, weeping. She would whisper sometimes, the traveler says, come, and the breeze would carry it. Leave, and the trees would sigh. But he heard only the water and the face within it. And when his voice broke at last, the nymph says, eyes dark with memory, it was not in song nor in boast, but in a plea. Why can you not love me as I love you? The traveler quotes softly. Why do you flee when I reach? And from the woods, the nymph says, voice trembling, came the only reply. Love you? A silence falls over your imagined scene, deeper than any before. You can almost hear the wind rustling the leaves, the soft drip of water disturbed by trembling fingers. And so he faded, the traveler says, body weakening, spirit unraveling. But the gods, the nymph murmurs, are not without their twisted kindness. For even in ruin they offered a form of remembrance. As the boy's breath slowed, the traveler says, and his gaze grew dim, a single tear slipped from his cheek. He pauses, falling into the spring, rippling the perfect image for the last time. And with that, the nymph says, his form dissolved. Not into death, the traveler corrects softly, into bloom. A single flower, the nymph says, white-petaled, golden at the heart. Delicate as the boy had been and rooted now forever by the spring that had claimed him. The first Narcissus, the traveler says, voice reverent now. A blossom born of vanity and sorrow to remind the world of what pride can cost. An echo, you ask, voice no more than a whisper. She lingered, the nymph says, for a time, watching the blooms sway in the breeze, her voice reduced to scattered syllables. Her tone softens, a broken love song carried by wind and water. Goodbye, the traveler murmurs. Goodbye, the nymph echoes faintly. And so the tale ends, the traveler says, leaning back, eyes heavy with the weight of ancient grief. Not with triumph, not with wisdom gained, but with a flower swaying over a boy's final folly. A warning, the nymph whispers, and a truth that to seek only oneself is to find only emptiness. You exhale slowly, the image lingering in your mind, a lonely bloom beside a still pool, in the echo of a voice long silenced. But, the traveler says, a faint smile curling his lips. Our tale is not quite finished. There is one place yet to visit and one secret left to hear. You might think, the traveler says, voice now gentler, more reflective, that with Narcissus gone, the forest would simply move on, that flowers would bloom, streams would flow, and the tale would fade into the dust of old stories. You lean in, sensing otherwise. But some wounds, the moss-haired nymph says softly, do not close so easily. The spring remained, the traveler continues, still cold, mirror smooth, and in its depths the echo of that fatal love lingered. It became a place of whispers, the nymph says, of dreams drawn too deep. Travelers would find themselves pausing by its banks, gazing longer than they meant to. Historians still argue whether it was cursed, the traveler notes, or simply a place steeped in sorrow so deep it left a mark upon the very water. But the nymphs, the moss-haired one says, knew, and so did the wiser satyrs. They left offerings, sprigs of thyme, drops of honeyed wine, not to appease the gods, but to honor the broken hearts that had lingered there. And among those who came, the traveler says, was one old satyr, gray-furred eyes weary with too many songs and too much wine. Selenian, yes, the very one who had dared mock the boy at the feast. He returned, the nymph says, not in triumph, in penance. You can see him, an old figure hunched beneath a tattered cloak, hooves soft upon the moss, a wineskin limp at his side. He kneels by the spring, not to drink, but to speak. I mocked you, boy, the traveler says, adopting the rougher tone of the satyr. And perhaps you deserved it, but none deserve such an end. And so he poured the last of his wine into the water, the nymph says, a gesture not of jest, but of mourning. And the water rippled, the traveler says softly, as though in reply. Some say he heard a voice then, the nymph whispers, a faint echo, farewell. Whether of echo or of the boy himself, none can say. But Selenian did not return to the revels, the traveler says. He wandered the woods thereafter, a sadder, quieter soul. And he told the tale not to mock, but to warn. For beauty, the nymph says, is a gift. But without grace, without humility, it is a blade turned inward. And so the tale spread, the traveler says, from forest to village, from village to city. Mothers whispered it to vain children. Poets wove it into verse. Even the gods let it linger, a subtle thread in mortal minds. And the spring, you ask? Still there, the traveler says, eyes twinkling faintly, hidden deep in the forest. A place where those with heavy hearts or hungry eyes sometimes stray and sometimes are lost. Echo's voice, you ask softly. Fainter now, the nymph says, but on quiet nights when the wind is right, you might still hear it. Beloved, the traveler murmurs. Beloved, the nymph echoes. And so, the traveler says, leaning back, the worst dinner guest's tale ends not in glory, nor in wisdom, but in a warning writ in water and petals. Yet the forest remembers, the nymph says, and so do we. You sit in silence for a long moment, the story woven tight around your thoughts. A banquet turned to ruin, a heart turned to stone, a beauty turned to bloom. And the traveler says softly, there are still places left to see and echoes yet to follow. You rise from your seat in the imagined banquet hall, the traveler says gently, and find yourself drawn beyond its crumbling edges, beyond the fading warmth of wine and light. The tale pulls you forward now, steps light upon a forest path dappled in moonlit silver. Leaves whisper beneath your feet, branches arching overhead like ancient sentinels. They say, the traveler continues softly, that long after the feast had faded into bitter memory, the ruins of that night remained. The tables left to rot beneath creeping ivy, the moss-haired nymph adds. Platters, dulled goblets tarnished. A hall once filled with laughter, now an empty shell. And in the heart of that ruin, the traveler says a single bloom took root. You picture it clearly now amid shattered crockery and brittle garlands. One lone narcissus swaying beneath shafts of pale light, white petals trembling, golden heart gleaming faintly. It is said, the traveler murmurs, that those who stumble upon that place may yet feel the echoes of that night. The weight of unspoken words, the nymph says, the chill of beauty adored and unreturned. And if one listens closely, the traveler adds, the faintest sigh may yet be heard, beloved, threaded through the rustle of leaves and the hush of air. You walk now in your mind through the abandoned hall. Your fingers brush cold stone. The scent of old wine and faded flowers lingers faintly. Callistos returned once, the traveler say, voice hushed, to pay respects or perhaps to forgive. He found the hall empty, save for that single flower. And a fragment of bronze, the nymph whispers, bent and tarnished, yet still bearing the faintest gleam of a once perfect reflection. He left it there, the traveler says, for some lessons must remain visible lest they be forgotten. And the hall, the nymph says softly, was left to the forest. Ivy crept across stone, roots split the floor. Time wove its own tapestry over the ruin. Yet even now, the traveler says, wandering feet sometimes find their way there. Drawn by pride, the nymph says, or by sorrow, or by the faint echo of a tale half remembered. And those who linger too long, the traveler warns, may feel a pull not of magic, but of memory, the lure of one's own reflection, the trap that waits for any heart unguarded. You pause beneath the imagined archway of that ruined hall, gazing upon the lone flower swaying gently amid the debris. A banquet undone, the nymph whispers, a life unraveled, a love unspoken, and all for the hunger of a gaze turned inward, the traveler says. Remember this friend, his eyes glint, for such hunger lingers in every heart that forgets the world beyond the mirror. You step back slowly, the ruined hall fading into shadow, the faint scent of Narcissus lingering still. And so we walk on, the traveler says softly, for the forest holds more yet, and the tale winds ever deeper. And so you walk, the traveler says softly, leaving behind the banquet ruins and their cold, silent warnings. The forest closes around you now, tall trunks rising like ancient pillars, their branches weaving a vaulted ceiling of green. The path winds deeper earth, soft beneath your feet, the air cool and still. Few venture this far, the moss-haired nymph murmurs, for the tales cling here like mist, and not all who seek them return unchanged. But you walk on, the traveler says. For there are truths yet to glimpse, truths that flicker in the edges of reflection, where story and sorrow entwine. Ahead, a faint glimmer winks through the trees, a flickering pulse of silver light. You follow it, the traveler continues, drawn by the echo of a tale not yet finished. The trees part to reveal a clearing where moonlight pools like liquid glass. And there at its heart lies the spring, the same waters where Narcissus met his fate. Perfectly still, perfectly silent. The cursed spring, the nymph whispers, a mirror to the soul and a trap for the unwary. Travelers still come, the traveler says, drawn by rumor, by longing, by wounds they cannot name. Some seek beauty, the nymph says, others answers, but all find the same reflection and the same danger. You approach slowly, feeling the chill rise from the water. The surface gleams flawless as polished obsidian. No ripple disturbs its glassy skin. Look if you must, the traveler says softly, but be wary, for the face that stares back may not be the one you expect. Historians still argue whether the curse endures, the nymph murmurs, but the wise know better than to test it. You kneel by the edge, heart thrumming, lean closer, closer still, and there it is, your own face pale in the moonlight, eyes wide with wonder and unease. Now listen, the traveler says, for the spring remembers, and beneath the surface a faint shimmer stirs. Not a reflection, but a flicker of something older, something deeper. The outline of a boy, eyes dark with longing lips parted in silent plea. He lingers still, the nymph whispers, trapped not by the gods now, but by memory, by the hunger that was his undoing. And the echo, you ask, voice soft. Sometimes, the traveler says, on windless nights, a voice half-formed, born on the still air. You strain to listen, breath held, and then soft as a sigh, faint as a dream, beloved. The word drifts across the water, ripples spiraling outward. You exhale slowly, heart aching, with the weight of a love never returned. Now rise, the traveler says gently, for to linger too long is to invite the same fate. You stand the spring surface, smoothing once more the phantom image fading into darkness. And remember this, the traveler murmurs, reflection is but shadow. It cannot warm you, it cannot answer. Seek the world beyond the glass or risk becoming no more than an echo. And so you walk on, the nymph says, the path winding away from the cursed spring. But the lesson, her eyes gleam, that you will carry. You glance back once the moonlight caught in still water, then turn away. The forest welcomes you once more. And still, the traveler says, there is more to this tale. For every story leaves its mark, and every mark shapes the stories yet to come. You walk deeper into the forest now, the traveler says softly, the air cooler, the shadows longer. But ahead another figure waits, one who carries the tale in his bones. The path winds between ancient oaks, their roots knotted like the fingers of forgotten giants. You follow the faint sound of a pipe, low and wistful, a melody steeped in old regrets. It is said, the moss-haired nymph murmurs, that one old satyr never truly left these woods. Selenian, the traveler says, voice shaded with memory, the bold one from the feast, the one whose jests tipped the scales. He roams still, the nymph says, a wanderer marked by the echo of a choice half made. You crest a low hill and find him there, a grizzled satyr, seated beneath a leaning tree pipe in hand, eyes clouded yet sharp beneath heavy lids. His fur is streaked with gray horns, dulled with age. He sees you, the traveler says, and beckons. You approach slowly. The satyr sets aside his pipe and studies you for a long moment. Come to hear the truth, he rasps, voice rough as worn stone, or to chase shadows. Either way, the nymph whispers, he will speak, for some tales demand to be told. Selenian gestures for you to sit. You lower yourself beside him on the moss-soft earth. I was there, he says without preamble. I saw the boy's beauty. I mocked his folly, and I watched him break beneath his own gaze. His eyes narrow distant. I thought it was jest, he says, a bit of mischief, a lesson in humility. But we forget, he taps his chest. The heart is a fragile thing, even when wrapped in pride. An echo, you ask? Ah, he breathes. Poor echo. Her love was the purest of all that night, and her loss, the deepest. He falls silent a moment, pipe forgotten in his lap. I see her sometimes, he says softly, or think I do. A flicker between trees, a whisper when no wind stirs. Beloved, he murmurs, eyes glistening. Still she calls, still she mourns. And the boy, you ask? Gone, he says, yet not gone. For every pool that mirrors the sky bears a trace of his longing. Every narcissus bloom sways with the weight of his tail. He sighs ancient and weary. And what lesson should I give you? He asks, gaze sharp now. You wait, breath held. This, he says, love the world beyond your own skin. Seek not your worth in the glass, but in the hearts around you. For no beauty, no reflection can warm a lonely soul. And never, he adds, voice darkening, mock a heart laid bare. For such wounds run deeper than jest can measure. He speaks true, the nymph whispers. Selenian leans back against the tree, eyes half closed once more. Go now, he says softly. Carry the tale. Let it be more than echo and bloom. You rise words etched deep within. The forest beckons once more. And so you walk on, the traveler says gently, a little wiser, a little heavier of heart. But with eyes turned outward now, not in. The pipe's melody fades behind you, a song of sorrow and warning. And the path winds forward still. The forest deepens around you now, the traveler says softly, but not with menace, with memory. For the woods here breathe with stories, and yours has only begun to weave among them. The path narrows, winding between gnarled trunks where lichen blooms in pale constellations. The air is cooler, touched by unseen currents, and ahead you glimpse the shimmer of water once more. You've heard of it already, the moss-haired nymph murmurs. The cursed spring, but there is more to know if you dare. For beneath its surface lies not only the boy's reflection, nor the sorrow of a vanished nymph, the traveler says, voice threading through the dark, but a secret older still, one whispered among the oldest satyrs and the deepest rooted dryads. You step into a clearing veiled in silver mist. The spring lies before you again, more still than glass, more silent than a shadow. Some say, the traveler continues, that in the moment of Narcissus's undoing, a fragment of his soul was bound to these waters. Not by malice, the nymph says, but by the weight of longing unfulfilled. And so the spring holds a mirror not only to the face, the traveler says, but to the heart, a mirror of truths one may not wish to see. You kneel at its edge once more. The air hums faintly against your skin. You lean forward, breath, slowing eyes meeting their reflection. Careful now, the traveler warns. Look too deep and the spring may show more than you seek. The water ripples faintly beneath your gaze, though no wind stirs. And within its depths, images flicker, memories not your own. A boy, golden-haired and hollow-eyed fingers trembling against liquid glass. A nymph voice caught between hope and despair fading into shadow. A feast gone cold. A hall drowned in silence. A single bloom swaying beneath starlight. You see now, the traveler says, voice, a whisper, the truth beneath the tale. Not a warning of vanity alone, but of longing left unchecked, of love left unheard. And if you listen, the nymph breathes, you may yet hear the echo. You still your breath. The clearing holds its silence, and then soft faint as though rising from the earth itself. Beloved, the word ripples through you, stirring something old and aching in your chest. Now rise, the traveler says gently. You have seen what lies beneath. Do not let it claim you as it claimed them. You stand slowly, the spring surface smoothing once more, its depths closing around their secrets. Remember this, the nymph whispers. To know oneself is wisdom, to love oneself is strength, but to lose oneself to either, that is the truest curse. You turn from the spring steps lighter now, though the weight of the tale hums within your bones. And so you walk on, the traveler says, carrying its lessons into the living world. For not all echoes are meant to be followed, and not all reflections must be trusted. The path widens ahead, lit by dawn's first breath of gold. And somewhere behind the spring lies still awaiting the next seeker drawn by its fatal shimmer. You walk on, the traveler says softly, but the forest seems lighter now. Not because the tale has lost its weight, but because you carry it more wisely. The path meanders beneath a canopy, slowly brightening with dawn. Dew sparkles upon moss and fern. Birds stir in the branches above their songs, tentative as if testing the morning. You come to another clearing, the moss-haired nymph whispers. A place where stories gather, a place where the tale of Narcissus still takes root. There among the roots of an ancient oak, a cluster of Narcissus blooms sways gently in the breeze. White petals gleaming golden hearts aglow. They say, the traveler murmurs, that each spring the blooms return, not by mortal hand, nor by accident, but by the lingering sorrow of that old tale. And those who find them, the nymph adds, often leave offerings not for the boy nor the gods, but for echo. for her voice that still wanders, seeking an answer that never came. You kneel among the flowers, the air rich with their subtle scent, sweet, but touched with the faintest trace of melancholy. Some bring coins, the traveler says, others song. In a few, his voice softens, simply sit and listen. You sit now amid the blooms, breath slowing the hum of the forest folding around you. And if you listen closely, the nymph whispers, you may yet hear her. You close your eyes. The breeze stirs, threading through the clearing, and then soft as if carried from the farthest edge of memory. Beloved, the word shivers through you, neither ghost nor dream, but something older, sadder, more enduring. And now you know, the traveler says, the tale lives not only in word or bloom, but in the hearts of those who remember and those wise enough to learn. For in the feast undone, in the beauty untempered, in the love unspoken, the nymph's voice deepens, lies the mirror we all must face. Look outward, not inward alone, the traveler says gently. See the world beyond the glass. Hear the voices beyond your own. And know this, his gaze meets yours. To be seen is not enough. To see, truly see, is the greater gift. You rise slowly, the blooms swaying at your feet. Dawnlight gilds the path ahead each step, now a thread in the larger tapestry of stories. And so you walk on, the traveler says, wiser, quieter, but carrying the echo forward not as burden but as guide. Behind you the clearing fades into golden green. Ahead the forest beckons alive with new song. And remember, the nymph whispers, not all mirrors are cursed, but none should be worshipped. The words settle within you a final truth among many. And with lighter heart you take the next step. For there is more yet to see, the traveler says softly, and more yet to hear. You leave the clearing behind, the traveler says softly, but its lessons linger woven through your thoughts like ivy through stone. The forest path widens now, sunlight dappling the ground. The air is fresh, the weight of the night's tale lifting though not forgotten. You walk slowly each step, measured, mindful. But there is one more place to visit, the traveler murmurs. A place where the tale is retold not in bloom or echo, but in voice and song. The path curves toward the scent of wood smoke and roasting chestnuts. Soon you emerge into a small glade, where travelers gather, a simple tavern beneath the trees, its roof thatched with moss and fern. This is where the stories live, the moss-haired nymph says, not on scrolls, not in marble halls, but in the breath of those who speak them. You step inside. The air hums with quiet conversation, the glow of a hearth painting the walls in warm gold. At the center of the room, an elderly bard sits by the fire, robes, worn eyes, bright fingers dancing upon the strings of a battered lyre. He knows the tale well, the traveler says, for he was once a boy who gazed too long into the wrong kind of mirror. Listen, the nymph whispers. You find a seat near the hearth as the bard begins to play a slow, mournful melody that seems to draw the very shadows closer. Once there was a boy, the bard intones, voice low and lilting, fairer than dawn, prouder than kings, a heart bound in silver glass, a soul lost to its own reflection. The room stills, tankards are set aside, breath slows. He feasted among gods and mortals alike, the bard continues, yet tasted naught but vanity. He heard a voice of love and left it unanswered. He shattered the gift he could not claim, and so was claimed by longing in turn. Echo, the nymph breathes softly beside you. And she, poor nymph, the bard sings, left only her voice behind a thread of sound across the ages, calling ever toward a love that would not hear. The melody swells the words, weaving through the air like smoke. And so, the bard finishes, voice fading, beware the glass that flatters, beware the song that drowns all others. And remember, his gaze sweeps the room. True sight is given not by eyes alone. The room exhales as one. The spell breaks gently like dawn through mist. And there it is, the traveler says softly. The tale retold not as warning alone, but as wisdom carried forward. For stories live not in endings, the nymph murmurs, but in those who carry them into each new beginning. You rise slowly, heart full, the music lingering in your bones. And so you walk on, the traveler says, not as one who heard a tale, but as one who knows it now within. For every voice, every bloom, every shadow along the path, the nymph's voice is warm now, will remind you to love well, to see clearly, to live beyond the mirror. And with that, you step once more into the sun-dappled forest, the bard's song trailing soft behind you. There are but a few steps left, the traveler says gently. Walk them well. The path ahead is gentler now, the traveler says softly. each step lighter, though the tale still hums within you. Sunlight filters through the thinning canopy. The forest has shifted, less shadow, more space, as though the very trees understand a chapter is drawing closed. But one final voice remains, the moss-haired nymph whispers, for stories like echoes call to one another across time. You follow the path as it winds toward a small village nestled at the forest's edge. Stone cottages warm with hearth smoke, gardens bright with late blooms. The air here hums with life. And in this place, the traveler continues, the tale of Narcissus lives on, not in sorrow nor in scorn, but in song and memory. Each year, the nymph says, as the Narcissus blooms, the villagers gather, not to mourn, but to remember. You follow the gentle sounds of flute and lyre toward the village square, where lanterns sway upon woven cords. Children chase one another beneath their light. Elders sip honeyed wine and smile knowingly. A simple feast, the traveler says, but with one purpose: to retell the tale, to remind young hearts and old eyes alike of what beauty can give and what it can take. You find a place among the gathering as an elder rises a woman with silver-streaked hair and a gaze both kind and keen. She speaks now, the nymph murmurs. Long ago, the elder begins, voice clear as bells. A boy loved only what he saw in the water, and a nymph loved him not for beauty alone, but for the heart that could not see her. The square stills, children wide-eyed, elders nodding. He dined among gods and mortals alike, the elder continues, but tasted only pride. He shattered the mirror he adored, and so was bound to longing. And she, the small child asks, she waits, the elder says softly, not for him now, but for us, that we might hear her echo and remember love is not found in glass or shadow, but in the voices we truly heed. And so, the elder finishes, we tell this tale each year that no heart may grow blind to the world beyond itself. And the flower, another child asks, it blooms still, the elder smiles, to remind us of beauty's gift and its cost. A gentle song rises, then voices twining beneath the lanterns. No dirge, no lament, but a soft weaving of memory and hope. And so you sit among them, the traveler says, not as a stranger to the tale, but as one who carries it forward. For every retelling, the nymph whispers, gives the tale new life, and every heart it touches may grow a little wiser, a little kinder. The song fades, the villagers return to their quiet joy, and you rise the night soft around you. And so you walk on, the traveler says, carrying not sorrow but understanding, not fear but a thread of wisdom woven through your steps. For stories are living things, the nymph whispers, and you, her voice fades with a smile, are now part of this one. The forest path awaits once more open and bright beneath the stars. And there is yet more to see, the traveler says softly. Come. The stars wheel above now, the traveler says softly. The forest behind you, the village lights fading into a soft glow. You walk beneath a vast sky, wiser, quieter, carrying the tale as part of your own. The night is cool, the air sweet with the scent of earth and distant blooms. Each step feels lighter, as though the forest itself exhales around you. But as with all stories, the moss-haired nymph murmurs, the heart needs time to ponder, to weave meaning from memory. And so you walk, the traveler says, not towards another spring nor another ruin, but into reflection itself. A gentle hill rises ahead. You climb it slowly, each breath drawing in stars, each step steady beneath their ancient gaze. Historians still argue, the traveler muses, whether the tale of Narcissus was first told to warn the young to humble the proud, or to mourn love unreturned. But perhaps, the nymph says, it is all of these and more. You crest the hill and find a small stone bench beneath a great oak. You sit, breath-slowing, gaze lifted to the stars above. For what is a reflection, the traveler says, but a story we tell ourselves. And what is a story but a mirror turned outward to help us see the world and our place within it? You ponder the boy at the spring, the nymph in the shadows, the feast undone, each image a thread, each thread a lesson. Do not seek yourself alone, the nymph whispers. Seek the voices beyond your own, for it is in their reflection that true sight is found. And do not fear beauty, the traveler adds, but temper it with grace. Wear it lightly as one wears a flower in the hair, not as a crown to weigh the soul. You smile faintly, the stars above echoing the blooms below. In love, the nymph's voice softens, is not the hunger of the eye, but the gift of the heart. To give without demand, to see without judgment, to speak with kindness, even when words cannot be returned. Carry this, the traveler says gently, For in a world that so often offers mirrors, it is wisdom that will guide you beyond them. You sit a while longer beneath the stars, the story settling within you like roots beneath soft earth. And when you rise, the nymph whispers, walk not with the weight of the tale, but with its light. For though born of sorrow, it carries hope if one knows where to seek it. The path ahead gleams faintly beneath starlight. You stand lighter than before, steps sure upon the earth. And so you walk on, the traveler says softly, not as Narcissus, not as echo, but as one who sees and listens and carries wisdom forward into the world. The forest breathes around you, the stars sing above, and within you the tale hums gently alive. Night deepens as you walk, the traveler says voice, a gentle hush now. But your steps are sure, your heart steady. The tale of Narcissus weaves softly within you, not as a burden, but as a quiet companion. The path winds beneath silvered branches. Owls blink from their perches, watching your passage with ancient eyes. The air is cool, each breath a slow unfolding. And sometimes the moss-haired nymph murmurs. The forest offers glimpses beyond the tale, a reminder that stories do not end. They echo through us, shaping what we see, what we choose, what we become. Ahead, a break in the trees reveals a wide, starlit pool. Its surface gleams darkly beneath the sky, a mirror not of vanity, but of the heavens above. You pause, the traveler says softly, and gaze not at your reflection, but at the stars reflected in the water. For now you understand, some mirrors are meant to show the world beyond ourselves. You kneel by the pool's edge, breath slowing gaze lifting between sky and water. Historians still argue, the traveler muses, whether Narcissus saw the stars above him that night or only the face within the spring. But perhaps it is not too late to choose what we see. The water shimmers, the stars glisten, and you seated beneath both listen to the quiet pulse of the world around you. Echo's voice lingers still, the nymph whispers, but not only in sorrow, in the rustle of leaves, in the hush of water, in the song of wind, you may hear her still if you choose to listen. A soft breeze stirs the pool's surface. The stars ripple gently, their light dancing across your skin. And so the tale teaches, the traveler says, voice low and warm, not to deny beauty nor to flee love, but to embrace both with open eyes and a generous heart. For love hoarded becomes longing, the nymph adds, and beauty clutched too tightly becomes a prison. You sit a while longer, gaze lifted beyond the pool, beyond the night, into the vastness above. And remember this, the traveler murmurs, to seek connection beyond reflection, to offer love without demand, to see the world in others' eyes, not only in your own. The stars wheel slowly overhead, the pool stills once more, and within you the tale settles like a seed awaiting bloom. Now rise, the traveler says gently, for the path winds on and dawn is near. The tale may rest, but your journey continues. You stand the earth cool beneath your feet, the air crisp with promise. And carry this wisdom forward, the nymph whispers, for in every gaze you meet, in every voice you hear, the story lives anew. You step lightly from the clearing, the stars at your back, the dawn ahead. And so, the traveler says softly, you walk on, not alone, not unchanged, but wiser, kinder, with eyes turned outward, now not in. The path winds gently onward, and with each step, the echo of the tale hums quietly within you, guiding, reminding, blessing your way. And so your journey nears its close, the traveler says, voice soft as dawnlight. But remember, stories such as this do not truly end. They live on, carried within us, shaping each new path we tread. The forest thins as you walk. The first pale fingers of morning stretch across the sky, painting the world in hues of soft gold and quiet blue. You step from the trees, the moss-haired nymph whispers, into a meadow kissed by light. The earth is cool beneath your feet. The air hums with gentle life. Before you, a scatter of narcissus blooms sways in the breeze, simple, unassuming, their beauty quiet, not demanding. And here, the traveler says, the tale's final lesson waits. You kneel among the flowers, breath slowing, gaze soft, not to seek your reflection, not to lose yourself in longing, but to honor the truth the tale has gifted you. To see beauty without needing to possess it, the nymph murmurs. To love without demand, to listen beyond your own voice. Historians still argue, the traveler says, a smile in his voice, whether Narcissus could have been saved, whether a kind word, a humble glance, a heart turned outward might have changed his fate. But you, the nymph's voice is warm now, you have chosen differently. You carry the tale as a mirror, not to trap you, but to guide you. The sun crests the horizon, the meadow glows, You rise slowly, heartful steps light. And now, the traveler says, go forth into the world. Carry the wisdom of the story. Share it in your gaze, in your words, in the kindness you offer. For every heart is a mirror, the nymph whispers. And in each we may choose to reflect love or longing, compassion or pride. Walk well, the traveler says softly. See truly, love freely, and remember the world beyond the mirror is vast and waiting. You take your first step into the sunlit path. The forest breathes behind you. The tale hums quietly within you. And so you walk on. The traveler's voice fades gently, as all wise ones must, carrying stories not as chains but as wings. Now take a slow breath, let it out gently. You've walked a long path tonight, through forest and feast, through echo and bloom, through the gentle sorrow of a boy undone by beauty, and the quiet resilience of a voice that would not fade. Let the tale settle softly within you now like morning mist upon the earth. No need to hold it tightly, no need to turn it over and over in your mind. It will stay with you in its own way, in a glance offered with kindness, in a moment of humility, in the warmth of a heart that chooses to see beyond itself. As you rest now, know this: you are not bound by reflection. You are not trapped by longing. You are part of a world rich with voices, with faces, with stories yet to unfold. And as sleep draws near, let that thought ease you gently downward. Let your breath slow, let your body soften. The stars still turn above and beneath them. The world awaits not as mirror but as endless living path. You are enough. You are seen. You are loved. Rest well now. The story will be here when you wake.